Hello and welcome to Families Made Differently. This is Bex Baker, your host, and I am here today with Stephen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Stephen McQuoid and I'm a friend of Bex and also live not too far away. We're in the same church together. In the role of fostering adoption, my role is as an adopter. My wife and I have adopted twice, although years ago we did some emergency fostering, which is also an amazing experience, which we really loved, but it was really adoption that we wanted to focus on, and we've been doing that for now 24 years.
You're an old-timer?
Old-timer.
So it's
and
nice
I feel
to have that experience to share with us today. That's great. How did you come to be an adopter?
To be honest, it's something that I always wanted to do. Long before I met Debbie, who's my wife, I always thought adoption was an amazing thing. I grew up in Africa, seeing so many underprivileged children, and then coming to live in the UK, realising that there are underprivileged kids in the UK as well, and kids without family. And I think growing up in a loving, stable family, I realised the privilege of my background. I always had a passion to do adoption, and I didn't initially, when Debbie and I first met and got married, I didn't mention that passion to her because we thought we'd go and have a traditional family and that's how life would be. And it was not long before we had our daughter Karis, our biological child, we began to talk about adoption, and then after Karis was born we talked more seriously, and I discovered that Debbie had the same kind of genuine desire, and it never left us. We talked and thought, let's just do something. And so we began the process, which, as you know, is a long process. I can honestly say it was a process that came from a genuine passion from both of us, which we both had before we met each other. And once we could talk about it together as a married couple, it became all very real to both of us.
And did you feel God was calling you into it?
I would say yes. Yes, in the sense that I think God burdens you with things. We both felt very burdened. We were at the time also getting involved in church planting and working in what was quite a tough area. So we had lots of contact with young people from a whole variety of different backgrounds. And when you work with young folk, particularly if they come from a challenging background, your heart goes out to them. You also see both good and bad parenting and neglectfulness in general community work. And you can't help feeling burdened. And you can't help thinking, I've been privileged with the family background that I have had. Is there not something that I can do? It's that burden that never left and a real passion for kids. And you just think, maybe I should be doing something. And as a Christian, because I think there is a faith element here. Had I not been a Christian, I still think I'd be interested in adopting. But as a Christian, I just think Christians have a responsibility to care for the world, and Jesus reached out to people who are marginalised and for whom nobody else was interested. And for me as a Christian, knowing how many kids are out there who don't have the love that they need, I'm burdened as a Christian to think about that too. So both as a human being and as a Christian, yeah, I felt that burden, and I do believe God called us into it. Yeah, I do feel a genuine conviction about it.
Great. How has adoption shaped your?
It's been interesting. We had a child first of all before beginning adoption, and I'd say it's shaped in the sense that it takes over. It genuinely does. Folk who talk about how tough adoption can be and how much work is involved, they're not exaggerating. It really is that. You have to commit your life. It's not a hobby. It's a life thing. That doesn't mean that you can't have a job or a career. Debbie and I are both hardworking folk. We've both had careers. We have pursued them. So it's not that it prevents you from doing those things, but like parenting generally, you have to give your life to it. So it shapes everything. And it did mean that work-wise I had to make decisions. Not that I couldn't do my job. I have done my job, I hope, very well, and I commit myself to my work. I do work very hard, but I also factor in the time needed for my family in that workspace. You can't do otherwise. I'd say it shaped Debbie's and my relationship. We have had, I would say, a minimum of me time, being frank and honest about it. So many of our friends who we have seen have a really fantastic social life have not had the challenge of adopting and raising family in the way that we've had with the time commitment. So you do sacrifice things. You have to. There's no way of not doing that. So it shaped that. We've had to plan ahead, very far ahead with stuff. We've had to think about the environment that our kids are living in very carefully. It does take and shape over family life. We can't pretend that it doesn't affect every aspect of your life. The question is it worth it? My answer is yes, absolutely. But there's no point pretending that adoption or fostering doesn't have a significant impact. And if you're not prepared to be impacted, then just don't do it. But I'd say that about lots of things in life, anything in life. If it's worth doing, it's worth giving yourself to it and working hard at it. I would say that about my job. I'd say that when I had hobbies, about my hobbies. The big difference here is that when I finally retire from my job, or when I'm too old to for example, play football, which I am already too old to play football, although I love playing it. I love going to the gym. When I'm too old to go to the gym, I'll still have kids. So there will be a time when my career, which I've loved and I work hard at and I'm committed to, there'll be a time when I'm retired and it's past. It's in the past. It's just history. That will never happen with my kids. That brings a perspective. When you enter into family life and when you decide to adopt for the rest of your life, you're committed. You're there.
You're also leaving a legacy in like people, aren't you, as well?
Yes, you are. It is a legacy, and you have to think in the long term. You don't do this just because you feel sorry for somebody. You do it because you're passionate.
Well said. What has been your favourite memory so far in your adoption journey?
I think I've had lots of favourite memories. It's not just one. With my son, who's very unemotional, it was in his teens when I would tell him for a long time, repeatedly, I love him. And I never expected him to say anything in return because not his style. And I would never force it either. It's fine if he doesn't want to say. But I do remember the first time, he hasn't often said this, but the first time he told me he loved me. We were out on a trip together. That's when he told me that. We came back and I welled up in the car. I just never been told after several years of having him, never been told that he loved me. And I went home to tell Debbie that. And that is exciting. Now it sounds daft to say it's exciting, but it was exciting for me.
I think other adopters will agree with you. Like, it's very significant, especially when it's a slightly older child as well, that first time.
It is significant, and it's not that you're looking for a reaction. I don't expect anybody to respond emotionally to me in my wider family circle or with my friendship groups, and I'm not necessarily a hugely emotional person myself, but I don't hesitate in telling my kids, my wife, my family, my parents, my brothers that I love them. I'm happy to do that. I don't expect them to return in kind. I'm not anticipating that, but if it happens, it's magical. It's great. Now, that's one of many memories. Often it's small things. It's my son saying, can we go fishing? Now, I hate fishing, by the way. It's cold, it's freezing, I don't find it interesting, it's boring. But to have my son wanting me to go with him, same as my daughter, she would prefer to socialise with Debbie because I'm her old man and we don't share the same interests. On those occasional, I'll mention a movie that she likes. Can we go to the cinema together? Love it, absolutely love it. Now again, I'm not expecting that. Everything in this world is a bonus, but it's really special. And to have your adopted daughter wanting you to take her to the cinema, I find that fantastic. Or going fishing, even though I hate fishing, I find that fantastic. There have been lots of moments like that, an awful lot. Or just family times where we go out for a walk together. We spend a lot of time as a family going for walks, and funny things happened, all sorts of interesting things happened. It's just the ordinariness of going for a walk as a family, going out with the dog, having a coffee in a coffee shop, laughing together. All those times are just special, and I love that. This is what this is all about. I just love it. Absolutely love it.
How has God been speaking to you through your adoption journey?
I actually think I have learnt more about my faith and more about God through adoption than through anything else. Certainly more than all the years I spent studying theology. While I love to study theology, I've spent years gaining lots of degrees. It's kind of head knowledge, it's book knowledge. You have to really experience something to really truly learn. We talk about God being a God of love, God being a father. The Bible is full of stuff about God's patience, his endurance. My favourite passage, by the way, is Hosea 11, where God talks about Israel being his son. It's a fascinating narrative because it begins with God saying, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and he describes how he behaves as a father, and then his son just gives him an absolute nightmare of a time. And you have in that passage God expressing his conflictedness with a difficult, rebellious child who he has loved unconditionally and he just gets grief from. I find it remarkable from a biblical perspective because you rarely get a deep insight to God's emotional life in the Bible, but it's profound when you do get so, and nowhere is it more real than there in Hosea. It's an incredible passage. When you then have a child, and this is true for biological kids as well as for adopted kids, all parenting involves going through challenges and difficulties and being disappointed and being heartbroken at times by your kid's behaviour. That's the part of life. I mean, parents who just have biological kids know that. With adopted kids, when they have challenges in their own lives and there's damage done, it's even more so. And to continue to love unconditionally, and then you think, well, that's what God has done. I said this to my son one day, that having adopted kids, having a family generally, and having all the challenges as well as the good times that we've had as a family, it's taught me so much about the importance of loving unconditionally and hanging in there no matter what, and then realizing that's what God does. I have learned so much about the character of God and what Hosea 11 means just through adoption. I really don't think that aspect of God's character I would have truly understood in the way I have done had it not been for this journey I've been on. I hope and I believe that my wife and I have contributed to the lives of all of our kids, our adopted kids or non-adopted kids. We have certainly gained loads in terms of what it's taught us. We are molded by life. I will always thank God for my kids and for what they have taught me and how they've molded my life because of our relationship together. It's a two-way thing.
And have you seen God's blessing in it? I feel like you're starting to even touch on that.
Yes. God's blessing is an interesting thing because it doesn't necessarily mean that everything will turn out as you expect it to be. Will all of my kids become Christians? Not necessarily. Will all of them be successful? Not necessarily. There are no guarantees in life. Blessing comes in all kinds of packages. For me, as a father, the biggest blessing is relationship. I'm blessed by the relationship I have with all of my kids, adopted and non-adopted. I love them all. I know I'm loved by all of them. They can't always express that in the way that I might like. That doesn't matter. I know it's real. I know it's tangible. And there are evidences all the time of that. It's a blessing to be in a relationship that is mutually loving. However difficult that relationship is, it's a blessing. I would say adoption has been one of the biggest blessings of my life. Next to my salvation and being married to Debbie, my kids have brought more into my life than anything else could. It puts all the challenges in perspective because it hasn't been easy. I feel blessed and I feel that every day.
What advice would you have for someone starting?
I would say, first of all, be realistic because it is hard. There's no two ways about it. So you have to be realistic and know that while things could be relatively smooth, they could be, and they often are, they also could be very, very difficult, and they often are. Both exist, and both can exist at different times as well. Enter into this thing knowing that this could be very, very tough. Secondly, it's a choice you make. Loving people is a choice. There's an emotional angle to it. I'm not denying the emotional angle, but we choose to love people. We choose to be faithful. We choose to honor our promises. That's a choice. And if you're going to go into adopting, it's for life. You commit yourself, and come what may, whether good or bad, through sickness and in health, as we say in our marriage vows. And marriage is the same thing. Marriages break down because people don't choose to love. We choose to do this. So make that choice, and only do it if you're going to make that choice. Then honesty with yourself, honesty with your kids. Kids are a lot smarter and more intuitive than we realize. Having a no secrets family life is pretty important. Being transparent, being open, talking to your kids very openly about everything that's happened, always answering an honest question. We have never ducked a question. Some questions have been very awkward. I mean, really awkward. Never ducked it. And it doesn't matter how young they are. Never duck a question. Always deal with it. Always protect your kids as well, because people respond to you as a family in different ways. I would have to say our overwhelming experience of people has been positive, particularly in church. We have found church amazing as adoptive parents. Church has been an incredible support. We've been aware of that. We've been blessed by that. But you still have to stand up for your kids, protect them, look out for them. Also, just try to enjoy the good times, because there are good times. Enjoy them, grow from the good times as well as the challenging times as well, and value them. These are precious, precious kids, and I think God's entrusted them to us. I know social work did as well, but God entrusted our biological child to us. He's entrusted our adopted kids to us. They are precious in His sight, and He will love them even more than we can. Absolutely value them, no matter what. They're precious. That's probably the only advice I could give, but it's a special life.
Well, that is the end of my questions. So is there anything you'd like to add before we close?
Just go back to what I said at the very beginning. As human beings, we should care about kids. As Christians especially, every child is made in God's image. And it doesn't matter if society has rejected some kids, if their birth parents have rejected some kids. They're made in God's image and they are of intrinsic value. I just appeal to Christians, if you can't personally adopt or foster, pray for people who are doing so. This is part of the church's job. It's the job of the church to care for the widow and the orphans. That's directly out of Scripture. And if the church can't be passionate about this, I don't know what the church can be passionate about. This is so important, and I celebrate every Christian who feels that they want to get involved at whatever level in this kind of ministry. And I celebrate churches that are very open about their interest in fostering adoption. This is a great thing, and it's what Jesus would be interested in doing. I would appeal particularly to Christians. This is serious business. The church ought to take a really serious interest in this, obeying our Father who's adopted us.
Amazing, thank you. Really appreciate you coming on today.
Great to be here, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
This was Families Made Differently, the podcast designed to share stories from Christians across the UK whose lives and families have been shaped by fostering and adoption. Please follow Families Made Differently on Instagram, and make sure you have all your notifications turned on so that you're notified about the next podcast.